Well, thank you, Andre. Let me just start out by saying I first came to anthroposophy as a dedicated opponent. You see, I'm the son of a professor of astronomy. My parental push was towards the sciences, and I grew up to be a dyed-in-the-wool materialist. I was first attracted to anthroposophy by its Christology, and while attending the foundation year at Emerson College in 1978, I had fellow students come up to me and say, "How dare you? You're working for the enemy." Given how natural it was for newbies to associate Ahriman with Satan from one's religious training, I suppose this was to be expected. Now, I spoke with John Davy, who offered words of wisdom for me, saying, anthroposophy needs to be in every field and in it with warm interest. I'll repeat, warm interest. Let this echo through all that you hear today and next week. Today, we set the table. We will explore the challenges for our age. Next week, we will address how spiritual science can help. The primary challenge to our human evolution today seems to be posed by what is called artificial intelligence, or AI. We can say that we are in the age of AI. Today, we shall show where and how AI will infiltrate society, thereby changing it forever. One might be tempted to cry out, "Why us?" Certainly, these are the toughest of times in evolution, right? Well, I suppose the challenge for each age has seemed overwhelmingly daunting to its participants. So now, let us get started in understanding this challenge. Professor Paul Levy is here with us from the UK. And Paul, I turn this over to you now.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And with about 40 minutes or so available, I think the decision I took was to share with you a little bit of what I'm researching as a social scientist here in the UK. I think I'll also mention, not that you have to buy it, but I've been writing books in this space for a long time. This one, Digital Inferno, has a story behind it that I'm going to share. And also, I'm currently touring a solo theatre show about AI as well. So I'm exploring it from a social scientific background and also from a theatre and arts background as well. And I think I'm going to say something that might surprise some of you. And I thought I'd leave it to the end, but I'm going to say it now. We're going to arrive somewhere soon where I'm going to suggest to you that AI currently does not exist on our planet. And I'm going to suggest something potentially even more exciting and dangerous exists instead. Before I do that, a little bit of a story, maybe one or two embarrassing photographs as well along the way, but hopefully you'll forgive me if I show you a few of those. Um, Here we go. Let's dive in here. That's me. I call myself a number of different names. I'm a writer, a conversifier. I attempt to bring conversation about these topics as much as possible. I call it a collusion breaker because I think we have to get real, and there's a lot of collusion happening around the technological space at the moment. You might have heard the expression hype. There's a very large amount of hype, which is essentially a deceptive phenomenon in the world, particularly used in the commercial world. And it tends to involve exaggeration and saying things have arrived sooner so that people buy things as early as possible and make money for large corporations. I call myself a technosopher or technosophist as well. And that will all become hopefully a little bit clearer. That's a picture of me in the, I think, late 1960s, on the right with my brother. On the left, something I can still remember doing whenever we went to the seaside. And I'd taken great pleasure with my own children, if we go to the seaside, in going back to my childhood again, getting my feet into sand, digging as much as possible into sand, building castles, all the kinds of things I remember doing. Of course, at that time, there was a landline telephone, if you could afford one, and computers were not in people's homes at all. I can remember playing in the street. And what I also remember was everybody's front door was open. And it was safe to go in and out of each other's houses. If we were careful, we played in the street. As more cars came along, we had to, be a bit more careful. But I've got these memories of climbing trees, all the kind of things that happen in Waldorf schools. I didn't go to a Waldorf school, but this is a kind of uh, pre-developmental phase for me because then something terrible is about to happen. Um, the first thing that happened was television in the UK became more than two channels. I know in other countries you had cable TV. We just had BBC and then ITV and then Channel 4. And these things called public information films started to play regularly. The first one made it very clear that children should not talk to strangers and that outside was not a safe place to be. And you shouldn't go outside without your parents. And of course, your parents would be working so hard, it was dangerous for you to go out on your own. And these played regularly. You were going to be picked up in a car by a stranger and driven away and never seen again. Whereas it's safer to stay inside your home because you wouldn't risk talking to strangers. The second thing that happened too is you probably need to stay in your home and not go out very much because that way a burglar will not come in and break into your house while you're out. So genuine behavior change starts to happen as people start to catastrophize the outside world. They're going to be picked up by strangers in parks. That times rather brilliantly with more TV channels. I only say brilliantly in a kind of ironic way. Then this arrives, which is called the computer game. And I can remember my grandparents upgraded their TV from a black and white one to a color one, which was apparently very exciting for them. And then this came free with it, a computer game. They didn't want it and they asked if we wanted it. Of course, as children, we said yes. We were already starting to watch TV more. And this was the first computer game. I don't know if anyone remembers it. It was a very simple but very addictive game of Pong, tennis it was called, and we started to play that literally for hours a day. And because it was dangerous to go outside and it was dangerous, to not go out as a family, I'm exaggerating, of course, slightly here for effect, but it was safer to play the computer game, and that's where they could see the kids, the parents. These became more sophisticated. These were available in pubs. Then it was available for children. And already then people were allowing their children to play these things for 6 to 7 hours a day. And I can honestly say that was the end of my childhood. There I am, I think about 11 or 12. I'd been brought my first computer. It had 32K of memory, but it played all kinds of different games. And I spent more and more time indoors. And the act of love from parents was to buy you a better and better computer game. What I notice is the hours I used to develop my own intelligence and interact with other people, my own natural intelligence was being replaced by my interaction with artificial intelligence in one form, which was simply the computer, certainly appeared to us to be an intelligent thing in its own right. You could ask it things, very basically though, press buttons, and it did things. And there was a fascination with that. And the first measures of how many hours people were spending on that came in at that time, because I think parents had concerns about this. And it was already manifesting in something called digital addiction, even as far back as the 70s. Luckily, I think I had quite a good childhood up until then. I was in a musical family, but as you can see, there's not a piano in the house. These were kind of computerized keyboards that made different sound effects. But I did join a band at 15, and we did at least play some kind of music. This is the next generation, well, some of our kids, and we made sure they went to Steiner School. This is my son on the left with his friend. They played conkers. Conkers is now illegal in schools because it's too dangerous. That happened about 20 years ago. They were drawing on trains, and we were determined that they didn't have computer games at too young an age. Growing up, still glad that he read, but he tended to read comics rather than books, but still drew with a real pencil and paper for quite a long time. Then this happens when they're 15, and this became the phenomenon of children spending 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 hours a day on what were called smartphones. So the story kind of, is interesting. This becomes the peak moment for children is buying the new phone rather than, getting a tree house built in the garden. And we start to collect evidence that writers are starting to write on smartphones and not tending to write in books and so on. And as a social scientist, I get really concerned about that, both as an individual myself, as a parent. And I guess that's where my journey begins in trying to understand what we might call the age of pre-AI, pre-artificial intelligence, as more and more devices start to kind of take over our lives. Now, around that time, um, a couple of things happened too. The word artificial intelligence started to be taught in schools, but at that time, we're talking now kind of the 80s going into the 90s, artificial intelligence was not a term used widely by people. We might see it in science fiction movies and so on. Robots start to appear, they're kind of gimmicky. This one could recite everything from Shakespeare and make a noise when you went near it, but these were not in any way impacting on society. They were just kind of gimmicks. We were kind of interested, and they seemed to look a bit like movies from like Star Wars. They were part of a fictional world that wasn't really part of our daily lives. I became concerned as a researcher that internet addiction was causing health risks, that children were taking time off school to game, and I just had concerns. And the reason I mention that and go back this far is many of those concerns have been made worse by the rise of things like ChatGPT. And we already have evidence, for example, interestingly from Japan, that a significant number of the younger population are interacting with ChatGPT as therapists. We know from the US, there's been a particular rise in people pursuing relationships with fictional boyfriends and girlfriends created using AI. And so if we were addicted to games in those early days, we're getting addicted in much more worrying and sophisticated ways than just gaming. I was worried, am I spending more time in than out? And I guess that was a big question for me. Now, AI, artificial intelligence, was largely just in people's imaginations as a possibility for the future. It was largely for science fiction, essentially. Now, at the same time as that, I was engaging with my students at the university and thinking one of the best things we can do is have some kind of conversation around this. So I just wanted to share with you, this was a little exercise. It goes back quite a long way, and I still run this with my students to get them thinking more consciously about the world of computers. And this was the question that I asked them. And it's something you might want to think of too. The challenge question is that we're being told we're in something called the digital age. Sometimes it's called the information age. So I ask my students, they're about 18 or 19 years old in the first year. I also ask it of master's degree students. If we're now in something called the digital age, when do you believe the digital age began? And then they have a big argument with each other. And I give them 15 to 20 minutes to discuss this. And I guess I've got a question for you now. I don't know, is the chat working, Andrew?
I don't know. I don't,
Does it say at the bottom whether the chat's working?
I don't know if you want it to go in through chat, but
Well,
I guess
it doesn't matter. I mean, if the chat's working and you can type it in, that's fine. If not, a question for you is, if we are in something called the digital age, everybody on this call, when do you think the digital age began? Could you put a number on it? Andrew, when do you think it began?
I'd put it about, let's say 1950, the year I was born,
And why have you put that?
because I was born then.
Okay, so just literally that. Okay, so that was
But
your
no, that's
experience of the
I
digital
put
age.
it there because, in a sense, that's when computers began to move from analog to digital.
Right. So it may not surprise you, we often get that answer too. Here we are currently in the kind of iPhone age, the age of the new iPhone coming up. This one was called Apple Intelligence. It was the first one to be called the AI phone. It
Right.
wasn't just a phone, it wasn't even just a smartphone, it was an artificially intelligent phone. But let's all jump in a time machine and go back in time because I get different answers from different students of different ages. Some people, in fact, the majority of young people say it's when the first smartphone began, when they got a phone in their hands that let them chat, let them play games, let them take photos. That's actually the iPhone 1. and it doesn't really look well. It's the iPhone 3, sorry, but people call it the first one. That was the first commercially available one, and that is Steve Jobs, who was, announcing it almost like a religious church ceremony. Thousands of people stood up screaming at that moment. So a lot of people say the digital age began with smartphones, and I suggest to them that we can go back further. And these actually are the first mobile phones. And a lot of people, Andre, and my age, often say the digital age began when they didn't have to use a landline, and somehow as you say, analog to digital, Andrew, came in. We get some other answers though that find interesting, and they're key to this little talk, this little presentation. That's actually the first ever mobile phone, and the first member of the public that was able to afford one of those satellite mobile phones was somebody called Elvis Presley, and he had one. But some people say it's when the first computer came out that we could buy and have in our home. And some people go back to the moment when that was invented, and this is the Apple computer, which actually didn't have a screen. It was invented in a garage by Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs and some of their colleagues. And apparently, if you own one of these up in your loft or down in your cellar, these are worth about $300,000, or not much less than that. But other people go back and point to this computer, which was the code breaker in the Second World War. It had about 12K of memory, but it was good enough to break the Nazi codes in the war. And some people say it had a major impact on the outcome of the war. And it was a code breaking machine. And there had never been a computer like that before. Or had there? We can go back to something called the Babbage machine, invented by Charles Babbage. And although this isn't digital in terms of, it doesn't run on electronics, that can carry out very specific tasks with punch cards using binary language that is really no different at root from the language we call AI coding today. It's the similar thing that an endless combination of ones and zeros creates a language that can be instructions, and you can get a machine to do something. This did quite complicated maths, and it was therefore coded. Now, one thing that's in common with all of these things at the moment is the notion of code. And I would say Rudolf Steiner and anthroposophists have been talking about something really, for me, that was a breakthrough here, because we can go back further. You might be able to buy these in an antique shop for not very much money. These go back to the 18th, even the 17th century. This was code. You could communicate using these different lights, communicate language. It didn't involve your human voice whatsoever. You could communicate in the same way you could do smoke signals or drumming, but this was essentially the same binary language that we have to power AI. It was a mechanistic thing where we could simplify the human voice down into just the bare meaning of the words, and there had to be fairly simple language. You wouldn't normally share poetry using these. We can go back further and find other kinds of code, going back literally 1,000, 2,000 years, until we get to a point which I find really fascinating, because this, which goes back to some of the first cave paintings, is instructions. And there's a very interesting bit of study here that when the earliest cave paintings are discovered, we find that there's a period of time that's roughly the same in different parts of the world, but it's really where cave art started to appear thousands of years ago. But mostly the cave paintings up to a certain point were just artistic. They just decorated the caves that people and the buildings that people have made. But then there comes a moment where actually they become instructional. And this is actually a cave painting that's very accurate and very specific. Now, before these paintings appeared, when people, and we've only got kind of not the written record, we've got story traditions, is that the father or the mother did not teach the son or the daughter how to do something in rational language. You were thrown out of the cave and you learned. Sometimes you might go with the group, but it was a kind of silent communion with nature. You improvised. People kind of prayed sometimes in holy areas, and they believed they would hunt better as a result of it. But when they came back, there's a moment when what Owen Barfield kind of called original participation, where people were just in a kind of dreamlike state, fearing the sun. They were very close to nature. They did things very intuitively. They didn't hear with their intellectual ears. They kind of had this wisdom that they shared in their group soul, And then there's a moment where that art changes, and it changes to this. And that is how to hold that particular bow, how to stand the distance you need to, the angle to get the straight hit, to maximize the chances of not starving, to find a group of the animals and then to aim at the to scatter all of them so that the middle one is confused, and that's the one you aim for. What we start to get is code. We start to get instructions. And what I try to do when some students do go back this far, they say, hang on, the digital age began when we first started talking to each other rationally, is that we've had a coded consciousness for a long time. And as we go forward from that place where before there was writing, before there were even instructional pictures, where we get to a place where there was art and it was kind of drawing the dreamlike nature of consciousness, the shared consciousness, the closeness to nature, the people that worship the sun in mysterious ways. There's a moment when we seem to wake up more into our intellect, and it manifests itself through rational communication, and that shows itself through coded instruction. And if we take our time machine forward, we start to find language, of course. And quite early on, we start to find the language is instructional. Of course, there's poetry, but there are instructions for doing things. This is actually, though, I believe it's a love poem in Old Chinese. And when I show my Chinese students, they laugh because they find it quite funny what this poem is. But then we start to get the separation where I hold a tool in my hand and I write code, which is in the form of language. And I start to put it down. And that piece of paper can be taken away from me and reassembled in the thinking of somebody else. So code starts to, when it's copied, starts to become widely used, and you no longer need the human being in front of you, a bit like the cave painting, to be able to reassemble the code. But in this particular case, cave paintings didn't tend to have somebody explaining them to a complete stranger. They were just for the family and that community. Here, we start to get books of very high value. They take a long time, but they were Bible books. They were books of prayers. And I say there were instructions on how to live. We start getting the first copies of legal documents and so on. That essentially communication, humanity starts to communicate in coded ways. And it was Rudolf Steiner who expressed the quote that books are the storage jars of the spirit. You know, there's something that is deadening about writing. And what we have to do is reassemble it in our heads and give up a little bit of our freedom to recreate those thoughts in our mind. That's different from my imagination being inspired by waking up and seeing the sun as a god of power. This is you read something and you reassemble it in your head. And programming is the same now. And of course, what we get is the printing press. And in order to print things, we have to simplify them, but we can really start to mass produce code now. And literally, we talk about people around the time of Charles Dickens consuming his stories with great glee. Because what they simply wanted to do is have the pictures of Charles Dickens into their head very easily, which was very, very different from using their own imagination. And we know about that in Waldorf education and not introducing reading too young, because we don't want children to become coded too young. And yet it's dear Steve Jobs who created a product that was being marketed right from the start to 3, 4, and 5-year-olds because it would prepare them for the world of work and somehow fire their imagination. And yet it's a double form of code, the computer, because not only is actually the language code, but the lights are flashing on and off. That's how you see the picture. And so we're actually physically experiencing that code visually as well. We come to the first typewriters. They get more sophisticated. Now we're starting to communicate with our fingertips. And the tips of your fingers are essentially a bit like a human head, whereas at least when you hold a pen, it's much more embodied, and that can yield some very interesting results, as I'm just going to briefly show you in a moment. We get the ones that can correct code, the correcting typewriter. That becomes the first word processor. Word processor. Then we come to the future, and that's all the kind of computers that we've got now. So that kind of brings us up to date in some ways. Now, I was getting concerned about this, and I just wanted to bring this time a little bit to a close. I've got I think about 10, 15 minutes left. Just to share with you, if I can find it quickly, a piece of my own research that I actually, sometimes it's called autoethnography. this type of research. It's where you begin, a bit like Mary Shelley's Dr. Frankenstein. You start to experiment on yourself, and then you start to collect data from other people. And the paper, which if anyone would like a copy, I'll be more than happy to share it with you, is this one here. Let's just dig it up. So the paper, which was published in a journal, is called Ink and Pixel, Pen and Stylus. And I became very, very concerned as I was falling once again into the digital world, that normally at the end of a day of, say, running a workshop for a company, of teaching a course, that I would reflect on my behavior for keeping a diary. What went well? What mistakes did I make? How could I do things differently? The classic journal things you do, you reflect on your experience. And I started to notice when I was on a train, as I often was, I was using this phone to record my experiences instead of a notebook. It was inconvenient to have a notebook. The trains, which we haven't invested in the UK, throw you all over the place. It was quite hard to write. It was easier to type on this. But I started to notice, I think, I'm going to call it a kind of attack on my humanity, and particularly an attack on my creativity. And if I just run very quickly through this paper, and if you want to read it, I'm just going to show you a graphic. This is the results. This is how I carried out the research, all the usual things you put in a journal. But I took samples of my writing. And you might notice in this writing, this was a typical bit of writing that I did. I'm feeling energized from the session I facilitated today. 40 people, but fixed chairs in a row format. For me, that involved, as usual, trying to step away from the lecture style. I'm there in the middle of the chairs. These are my crazy notes, but I understand what I mean. Standing in the front as I try to encourage and demonstrate informality and its value in learning. It worked, and I didn't make it work. Everyone did. And I'm reflecting on how I empowered a group of people not to rely too much on me, the teacher or the facilitator. Now, there is a little measure that we developed as part of this, which I call the ego index. And the ego index is where you take a sample of your writing. In the case I was doing 500 to 1,000 words of handwriting, and you divide the total number of words by the number of times you say I or me. And what I discovered was that my handwriting like this was sometimes about 30 to 1. When I did a similar experiment with my typed writing, and that's just an example in that box there, it was about 100 to 1. So that means for every 100 words, I was only saying I or me, something personal, once. Whereas with 40 to 1, every 40 words I was saying I or me. And I started to look into the literature, and some of the psychological literature said, if you only say I or me once every 100 or 200 words, you are kind of asocial. You are kind of almost sociopathic. If you are saying every 5 words you say I, me, it's kind of ego overload. You're kind of an egotist. 40 to 1, they were saying, was quite healthy when people talk. You're investing yourself. Your self is intact in your writing. And so the conclusion from this is that typed writing, in the end, makes us more less present, less awake in ourself. We become more mechanistic because our sense of self is not expressing itself in that writing. And I got very, very concerned with that. Now, and I've done lots and lots of experiments now around artificial intelligence, and I just wanted to finish with that. AI has been around in some form since 1950. In fact, the phrase was coined in the 1950s. For a long time, essentially what was happening was computer programming the programmers were trying to become more and more efficient, more and more clever about what they could do with artificial intelligence. And perhaps not surprisingly, or maybe surprisingly, they looked at the human brain. And they saw the human brain as the cause of consciousness. So the conclusion from that was that if we can mimic the human brain in a computer form, we can create artificial human intelligence. That was actually the term. And in 2022, the scientists who'd been working on this were quite frustrated because the only way they could dialogue with the AI, which they trained and trained and trained on more and more data to make it a bit like human beings who have got something like 59 trillion bits of data, memories, pictures in their brains, they trained a computer on about the same amount. But also, they kept trying to make the interface between a human and the computer more and more like talking, which they call natural language processing. And they'd never been able to do it before. And it was like a classic scientific aha moment of something working, and they didn't know why it was working. Suddenly, we could talk to the computer like I'm talking to you now, and it started to answer us just like a human being. And very quickly, there was a big money making opportunity. Chat GPT, the first one, was actually in the 80s, and you couldn't talk to it, you had to program it. Suddenly, Chat GPT-3, you could type it to it as if you were talking to a person, and it would type back. And everyone's become very fascinated with that. And they announced that artificial intelligence had arrived. Now, I know a lot of scientists, I'm in this field, and some of them that I respect most say this is just hype. This is just trying to groom us for the age of AI. But it's not AI. What happens is, because it's trained on lots of data, it's impersonating human beings at the moment, and sometimes getting it right, and sometimes doing a very bad impersonation. Or it's doing an impersonation of some of the worst people in the world you'd never want to talk to because they're liars, they're deceivers, they pretend to know the answer when they don't. And the reality is, because it's so not really very successful at the moment, they are applying more and more, a bit like putting a band-aid, a plaster on a wound, more and more traditional programming to make it work. It's like trying to tune up an engine by, putting string around it and then trying to add this and that to make the engine work better. And at the moment, artificial intelligence, for anybody I think that knows what AI really is a brand. It's a product. And the language given to our kids is to get us to buy into it. And that dehumanizes us because actually children are feeling the pressure of not missing out, of not being cool, of not having the latest products. In my university, our students are using it to write essays, but our lecturers are using it to mark essays. And at the moment, it's a fairly poor copy of human intelligence. And maybe just to share with you the scary bit maybe of the presentation is I just wanted to show this. Have I just got a few minutes left now, Andrew? Is that right? Just checking on time.
I think we
You've
do.
got a few minutes left. Yeah.
Okay,
You,
great. So just to wrap up, I'll just share
you
one
got
more
a
couple of things.
good 5 minutes.
Oh, good, 5 minutes. Brilliant. So I'm just going to go straight on to Google. And I'm going to look up something called organoid computing. Let's just look at a few images. This is actually the picture on the right here. It's just quite good to show it to you. What you're looking at there is a mixture of computers. You can see the kind of links where information travels through electricity. But at the center is human neurons. And it turns out the human brain, perhaps not surprisingly, is very efficient. It uses very little energy. It's very good at storing data. And organoid computing by 2050 are going to be brains, partly grown from human tissue, operating in laboratories. And we're going to be trying to use them to be artificially intelligent. We may even grow human heads, or we may decide the human being isn't very efficient and effective. We might grow insect brains. But AI is going to be largely biological. And most futurists that I respect absolutely say if we get past the idea that current AI is just computers using the same code as all those languages we saw right back to cave paintings, instructions, artificial intelligence we know is not intelligence is not only instructional, and we also know hopefully in this community that the brain isn't the root of consciousness, it's where consciousness plays out in a physical realm. And so AI is going to be interesting because there are questions even being asked by the spiritual community about whether certain kind of forces and beings might even try and incarnate into these things, or whether they're just going to be a kind of new form of non-sentient intelligence that is able to pretend to be intelligent, or whether because it's using biology, it genuinely will feel pain, at least at an animalistic level, with kind of I know this sounds horrible, but with kind of artificially intelligent plugins from computers making it more effective. And we don't know. The writer Ray Kurzweil, who wrote a book called The Singularity is Near, has made one important point. I don't agree with everything he said, though, is that by about 2056, we're going to be offered this type of thing to enhance our own thinking, to stave off Parkinson's disease and dementia. And you know that Neuralink and Elon Musk are already trying to do that. And we're kind of entering a kind of Frankenstein age. I just wanted to end with a little glimpse of my future in higher education. And I'm not kind of slandering my own university because I don't think they're remotely looking at this at the moment. In fact, I'm quite pleased with some of the ethics around both universities I work in. But here's me. I'll walk around. This is my virtual classroom for some of my students, and we've just done this as a kind of experiment. Over here are some photography. We can pop over here. These are all the papers that they have to read. This works with sound and with vision. There's even a mirror that I can go and look in over there. But these are the papers to download. They can appear in here at the click of a button as their own avatar, as it's called. So this isn't my double. This is an artificial version of me. And at the moment, I make this talk. I make it move like a puppet. But a year from now, when this is trained on something like ChatGPT, with all the rules and regulations and knowledge of our university, a student can access me 24/7 with my voice, sounding like me, and I'm not even on the computer. And this is exactly where people are at the moment. As you can see, is this artificial intelligence or is this artificial impersonation? And impersonating can be brilliant, but it's essentially deceptive. And I think the biggest mistake that we're about to make, and we will, is when we make the impersonation so good, no one can tell the difference, our behavior will be changed. And because true humanity is about honesty and truthfulness, in my view, that's what makes us ethical, is we will start to diminish what it is to be human. And the reason I'm writing a book called The Fall of AI, and it's something Andrew and I talk about a lot, is humanity, particularly in things like anthroposophy, has fallen into matter. And right now, at the turning point of time, the last few thousand years, we're supposed to be rising up with our individuality intact. And just at that moment, AI is falling on us. And the question isn't how do we avoid it? It's how do we continue to rise with the exercises, the activities that we develop to meet AI with a strength of our own. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Paul. So it looks like your computer's battery is very low on your little icon. Dear Andrew, so shall we make a break of 5 minutes?
Yes.
So, dear friends, please, stretch your limbs and, have a sip of water. So we will be back in 5.
Okay.
Thank
And
you.
those who stay here can chat about what they just heard. And
Okay, dear Andrew, over to you.
okay. And I want now to, in fact, I'll just say Paul and I didn't coordinate much for this. So some of what I'm going to bring will be, let's put it this way, enhancements to what Paul brought, but we're going to cover some of the same stuff. Because today I want to reveal to you more about how AI will become commonplace in the near future. And yes, by near future, I mean in the next 5 years. Business foresees the AI market as perhaps the biggest market ever, bigger than all the current revenue from the internet. Investment funds have poured into it at unprecedented rates. Artificial general intelligence, so if you hear AGI, that's what they're talking about, artificial general intelligence, is coming in 5 to 10 years. What is AGI as compared to just AI? Well, it's when an AI machine has intelligence at the human level. There's something beyond that called ASI for super intelligence. Now, the winners in the market for AGI are going to be very wealthy. And it appears today that these who will be wealthy by orders of magnitude are the ones who are currently already wealthy. Countries will likely make this into a race, and they will use patriotic messaging to be able to be the country that succeeds. And of course, we know there's a race already between the United States and China. And whoever wins, it will find it massively rewarding economically. Now, with such competition comes the question, will safety and morality take a back seat to this economic superiority? And one of my heroes, Tristan Harris from the Center of Humane Technology, have called for a non-proliferation treaty, just as we have for nuclear weapon testing. Again, will competition or morality win out? And how can we get East and West, particularly China and the United States, to agree on development and deployment rules? Is this end inevitable, or is it just a way too difficult? Let's look at what AI and AGI will be able to do within 5 years. Elon Musk forecasts a near future where AI will be handling most of the existing jobs. Thus, due to widespread automation and AI, humans will need, according to him, a high universal income. You know, you've heard the term a universal basic income. He's calling it a high universal income. Now, Bill Gates claimed that teachers and even doctors could be largely replaced within 10 years, and humans won't be needed for most things. We need to realize now how important social threefolding is, for AI will augment each and every human job, bringing about as much as 4-to-1 reductions in the workforce over these next 5 years. These reductions with AI will be mostly white collar jobs. The blue collar jobs are already being greatly reduced through robotics. In his first address, the new Pope, Pope Leo XIV, identified artificial intelligence as one of the main issues facing humanity, saying it poses challenges to defending human dignity, human justice, and labor. In years past, my gardens at this time of year were covered with pollinators. Because of the existence of Triple E and West Nile, my neighbors now use pesticides, and I no longer see any honeybees. What happens if we need to replace the honeybees with artificial bees? They might still achieve pollination, but we will lose honey, for honey comes via the regurgitation by the foraging bee when she returns to the hive. What else might be lost? From spiritual science, we learn that the concept of the hive will be a state achievable by future human society, albeit far future. Without this example being present in nature, will we lose the ability to achieve this social structure in the future? Where will these so-called job cuts come? Well, from all industries. Oh, come on. Even tech? Yes. AI already is writing most of the code now being released to the devices you are using. There will be a few new jobs where one is taking care of robots, but eventually robots will be taking care of robots. So, what kind of jobs will there be 5 years from now? If you felt inspired to compete for one 5 years hence, how might you prep for this job interview? Likely at that time, your coach will be an AI tool. When you go for the interview, Likely you'll be online speaking with a robot who will screen the hundreds or thousands of applicants down to the best 5 from which your potential hiring manager will pick one, hopefully you. Actually, this is already happening. Bet you didn't know that. We should ask, with universal basic income or high universal income given to everyone, what might happen to your motivation to have a job? Long ago, most jobs revolved around the farms. Today, migrant workers are still needed to harvest crops, but tractors and other machines have long changed the life of the farmer and the farm. Now, the life of the farm itself will drastically change. AI will know how and when to plant, to weed, and to harvest. The farmer of the future might not need to wake at the crack of dawn anymore. Already we have machines that can harvest 90 tons of fruit per day. Already over 90% of the work in automobile factories is done by machines. Yes, we can bring back manufacturing to the US. More than 60% of blue collar work today is done by machines, and this will grow to 90% or more in the next 5 years. In January of last year, a survey of over 1,400 business executives found that 66% were quote, ambivalent or outright dissatisfied with their organization's progress on AI and generative AI so far. The top issue cited was AI's lack of talent and skills. It's a problem that evidently hasn't improved over the last months of this year. Another survey recently found that over 55% of business leaders in the UK who had rushed
thank
to
you.
replace.
I couldn't get the phone. I'm on a internet thing. Thank you.
Okay, and if you could mute, thank you. They now regret their AI decisions. It's not hard to see why, as shown by an experiment that Carnegie Mellon researchers did, where they created a fake software company full of AI employees and found that their performance was laughably bad, that the AI worker was finishing less than 24% of the tasks assigned to it. But we know of many parts of our world where AI is going to be deployed in the near future, if not all jobs. In a few years, you may not even need a driver's license ever again. Cars with AI will operate without human drivers. In fact, you likely will not own a car again after you finish using your current car. So, what will you use your garage for? Some people may not like the traffic jams of the future. Some may opt for the self-driving airmobiles. How will all this traffic on the roads and in the air safely navigate? Well, we have something called LiDAR, and like radar, it's an enabling technology for autonomous vehicles. It means light detection and ranging. It produces an enormous amount of data that must be processed immediately in real time for autonomous vehicles. The AI in such vehicles then must be powerful. Is the skill of driving a car something you are willing to give up in our march towards our future and human evolution? Probably you said yes. But what else can we give up and yet remain human? We commonly think of AI as an aid to writing essays or for finding the best quote. I want you to look at these headlines for accomplishments that AI has already achieved. Some will argue that if we already regulated AI, as some have suggested, then some of these we might not have achieved yet or for many years, if ever. Because with regulations, what will that mean to such developments? Will regulations cost us lives that could have been saved? Who is to regulate? Who makes the rules, the regulations themselves? And who controls and monitors? What punishment if you don't adhere to the rules? Do such competing goals lead to a kind of dystopia? So, on the other hand, why don't we just let it rip? Oh, yeah, we fail repeatedly when we face temptation. Bad actors will create really bad weapons and lead to really bad chaos. Can we remove the human and program machines to make autonomous decisions that are moral? Huh, maybe. But then, what is moral? Is it possible for humanity to agree on what is moral? Tristan Harris said, AI is humanity's ultimate test and greatest invitation, end quote. Apparently, although he comes close, he has never heard about Ahriman, but he poignantly points out just how significant this point is in human evolution. Just as the mystery upon Golgotha was the turning point of time, this current age that is leading to the incarnation of Ahriman certainly must rank up there in cosmic importance. And as Tristan says, it is up to us. You see, the gods respect our freedom and will not intervene, even when we are making really bad mistakes. And we'll talk more about that next week. Likely, we have all heard of generative AI. It is already in use in schools, writing term papers, in writing media articles, in creating meeting minutes and legal documents. Now comes for agentic AI. It refers to AI systems that can autonomously make decisions and take actions to achieve goals with minimal or no human intervention. These systems are not just reactive to input, but they are proactively pursuing tasks and solutions. They can perceive, reason, act, learn, and collaborate with other AI agents to solve complex problems. Are we going to use these to control our nuclear weapons? Well, here are some examples that we feel safe for rolling out in the next couple years or few years. Autonomous vehicles, we've already talked about those. In healthcare, AI agents that can monitor patient data, adjust treatment recommendations, and provide real-time feedback to clinicians. We can deploy them in customer service, hello. AI agents can handle your customer inquiries, resolve issues, and personalize customer experiences that we've all had. Supply chain management. They can optimize the routes, predict bottlenecks, and adjust inventory levels based on demand fluctuations. Oh, this sounds wonderful. Yes, Rudolf Steiner did indeed foresee these times and the coming of this Ahrimanic intelligence. On the 24th of April, 1922, while in London, Paul, he said, quote, "It is of the first importance that there should be in the present time a certain number of people who know where man stands in his spiritual evolution and also know what must be his next step if civilization is not to go completely under." For what is happening today? In speaking to you, my dear friends, this is Steiner still speaking, I can use anthroposophical terminology and say at once that the Ahrimanic forces which are at work wherever we think or act on a materialistic basis are in our day trying to chain us to the earth by gaining possession of our intellect. He continues, they are at this moment very powerful. These Ahrimanic forces are searching out all kinds of ways to gain access to our souls with the object of enticing us to the adoption of a purely materialistic outlook, a purely intellectual understanding of the world. Is that happening? It is on this account important that there should be, as I said, this is Steiner, as I said, a certain number of persons who know how the evolution of humanity has to proceed in order for us to reach our goal. This will be our topic for next Saturday. Many of you are feeling fear at this moment. Rather than fear, Paul and I wish today just to raise our awareness. Okay, so perhaps Mikael and his angels are going to come riding in on white horses and save us all. No, nothing to worry about. We'll all be okay, right? Well, that's not what we just heard. We need those who can act out of knowledge of the goal of human evolution. Who knows that goal? Each of you do. We have to act not out of fear. We need to know where the battle is taking place if we are to act. You have heard now many areas where Ahriman is active. It is not so much that machines with AI are entering life, but that our inability to adjust so that the human soul, that is, the consciousness soul, can meet its proper evolutionary challenges. Let's look at a modern soul life. According to a recent article in Vox, Gen Z, the younger generations in America especially, feel more lonely and isolated from each other and from society in general than ever before. It is one of the defining stories of the 2020s. Anywhere from 2/3 to 3/4 of Gen Z report feeling isolated, alone, or disconnected from the world. This now affects how they socialize, date, get married, or find community in general. Are you feeling disconnected? How can this be possible in the age of the internet? Tristan Harris, in his April 2025 TED Talk, offered what he called the benefits and the detriments to the implementation of social media. One benefit is that it can give everyone a voice. One known but unexpected detriment is that it caused addiction to social media and to games. Now, another thing that many of us have already fallen for or come close to it are scams, phishing that's going on. And Google has now got an AI that can spot scams in your texts or investment frauds. You see, last year, Americans lost $16.6 billion to such online crimes. Now, if they could flag romance scams, oops, they do already. This past week, it was reported that chatbot Grok often starts babbling, even when unprompted, about white genocide. Here's one example that was reported when a person asked Grok how many times HBO's streaming service has changed its name. Grok initially answered correctly, but then it went on to say rebranding reflects corporate strategies, not consumer demand. And regarding white genocide in South Africa, some claim it's real, citing farm attacks and kill the Boer as evidence. Huh. Many have wondered if this was intended as a form of support for the president's position on allowing white immigrants from South Africa to come to the US. I don't know if you heard about that. That plane just arrived this week. How has social media and smartphones affected the adolescents who grew up with it? And Paul tried to address this. It has resulted in an unprecedented mental health crisis. And MSNBC has reported on this article. Religiosity, they go on to say religiosity and spirituality are becoming less taboo among Gen Z. You might think that's weird, but it is because their parents popularized a religious disaffiliation. And so a religious affiliation becomes a kind of counterculture to their parents. Younger people have begun to question political and secular institutions and conventional political parties and their leaders. Perhaps, perhaps they are looking for anthroposophy. When one looked into any church in the early 2000s, the attendees were mostly women. Yet young women are now leaving American churches en masse. Research from the American Enterprise Institute's Survey Center on American Life showed the reason is largely because of what these churches teach about the roles of women in religious institutions, about their sexual abuse, about their positions on gender equality, as well as their political leanings, especially of their parents' church. What are these young people now seeking? Well, research has shown they're seeking equality, freedom, and sisterhood. Sounds like social threefolding to me. Now, privacy has become a huge issue. Can your smartphone and home security system be used by your government to spy on you? Are you concerned that your smartphone, that your Alexa might be listening to you full time? Maybe she is reporting you right now to the authorities. You're on some weird anthroposophical webinar. Well, for those worried about privacy, humor here, Meta has a new AI. Instead of the female voice Alexa, it has a male voice. It responds to the name Alex. And as a typical guy, Alex never listens to anything. So your privacy is safe with Alex. Just download Alex. Just kidding. During the 1980s, the idea of a healthy balance in work life emerged. It had been a hippie concept in the early 70s that eventually found its way into the business world. You can find many articles today reminding us that with the internet and email and Zoom and all, one can easily allow the workday to extend from 8 hours to 10 to 12 and even more. Will AI help us reestablish this work-life balance? Or will it make it worse? Riddlesteiner spoke about the need to balance Lucifer and Ahriman. Might that play into this or other balances that we need to maintain for our human health? The workplace once offered us a social scene. People wore business attire to their jobs. They wanted to look good and found a kind of social satisfaction in their job. At one's occupation, there were many social circles that one belonged to, such as a coffee club, a workout club, an engineering excellence club, a lunch club, a sports club, an after work pub club. With work at home, many of these clubs have disappeared from the social scene. One result of work at home is loneliness. According to Mark Zuckerberg, the average American has fewer than 3 friends, and the average person, according to Mark, has the need for many more. Zuck guessed that the desired number is around 15. Yet instead of promoting new connections with real souls, Zuck wants to fake that experience with technology. The movie Her may have been his inspiration. With faked empathy, will it erode the real thing? After artificial intelligence, will the next thing be artificial soul? Can heartless Ahriman fake empathy and soul warmth? Nope, he cannot. But maybe he can with human help. Mark Zuckerberg wants you to have not only AI friends, but also an AI therapist, as Paul was mentioning, and also AI business agents and many other agents. In Zuckerberg's vision of a new digital future, AI friends will outnumber human companions, and chatbot experiences will supplement and then supplant therapists. AI will play a central role in the human experience. I'm going to give you a made up example. In the future, you'll go to a doctor's office, or you'll say, I got to have a doctor's visit. And perhaps, most likely, you'll never leave home for this doctor's appointment. It will be done entirely by the AI generated image of your doctor. Hopefully, much better than that image Paul showed of him. But you'll be examined and assessed by this AI doctor. Your prescriptions will be renewed and delivered later the same day. After your doctor's appointment, you're going to feel happy and creative from those medications. And you might say to yourself, oh, hey, Alexa, or whatever your AI companion's name is, hey, Alex, here is the theme for the next movement of my symphony that we've been working on. I want you to fill out the music sheets for this with emphasis on the percussion and horn sections. Or perhaps you're feeling inspired this week to create a new TV show based on a next Netflix show that you saw. So you say, hey, Alex, here is the climax scene for the next episode in my drama from today's doctor visit. I want you to write the script. Start with waking up in the morning. Take me through lunch where I get a foreshadowing of the drama that's going to occur when I have dinner with my boyfriend. And that's what I want you to focus on. But during the office day, I want you to bring in all the usual characters. And it'll write the script for you. Wow. Think of all the free time you're going to have in the future. So, may I suggest that what is coming is a demand for the development of the sense of ego and the word. What you see is going to be so full of deep fakes that you are going to have to develop this sense of the ego. You're going to have to develop this sense of the word from what you're hearing. A decline in unhappiness is especially apparent in younger adults and adolescents who are aged 12 to 24. Many of them are facing depression and psychological distress. Their rates of these are much higher than those who are just a few years older. This is a quote now, a number of cultural forces may be at work that have had a negative impact on life satisfaction and views of society, including declining in-person social interaction, increased social media, and increasing income inequality, end quote. A study from the World Happiness Report of 2024 showed. And it goes on to talk about Globally, young people under the age of 30 have witnessed a dramatic decline in happiness since the COVID-19 pandemic. The fall in happiness is particularly sharp in the US, which fell out of the index's 20 happiest countries for the first time since it began publishing in 2012. Loneliness is our silent pandemic. Interestingly, Rudolf Steiner foresaw this, and he had some thoughts about loneliness, saying, quote, "A soul experiences a strengthened consciousness precisely in these times of loneliness." And in another lecture, he adds, "One is no longer possessed of a ready-made heart and feeling with its spontaneous reactions, nor of a penetrating intellect, but impelled by the consciousness soul to develop something far more detached, more individual, more dependent upon egoism and upon human loneliness inherent in the organization, beginning with one's own body, than was needed for the development of the intellectual soul." End quote. This is part of Ahriman's duty to provide an adequate environment for the development of our consciousness soul. Oh my goodness, how far will this go? Each of us has an Ahrimanic double. It has been a part of each incarnation since the fall. It joins our soul in the physical body just before birth, and it remains with us throughout our life until just before death. This double has become especially powerful in this age. It whispers in our ear whenever we deliberate on just how we should make our decision. Rudolf Steiner spoke of these times of having an Ahrimanic device that we carry around with us like a companion. Huh. I wonder what that could have been. I was bemused by the term your AI twin that you see here. When you get a chance, note the use of the term twin in biblical and other ancient or mystical texts. I don't have time today to do it all. Time is speeding up. The time between incarnations is shrinking. What we are facing this decade is quite different from our past decades. We all have that Luciferic voice in us. Well, I prefer the old ways. I don't like these new ways. But we must be Rosicrucian. We must be where the world is. We cannot go and form Essene communities. It will take strength to focus on supernature while technology is offering us an easy slide into subnature. Strength we will need to carve out time to be in supernature, where Ahriman has no access. Addictions to social media and entertainment already exist. How many here would prefer tonight to watch a movie or a show than to sit and study a Steiner lecture or to engage in some sort of spiritual exercises? Rudolf Steiner was not against science nor against technology. Rather, he admired them. He sought to expand natural science across its boundaries into spiritual science. When a science teacher is hired by a school, such a teacher should already have a warm interest in that subject. Never should it be someone who hates that given subject to be hired to teach it. As John Davy said, every field needs anthroposophy working within it with warm interest. On television, the Murderbot Diaries, I've never seen them, is playfully exploring what it means to be a machine with consciousness. I don't think that's possible, but anyway, the appearance, the impersonation, as Paul said, is going on. Meanwhile, in courtrooms, in laboratories, in tech company boardrooms. The boundaries of personhood and moral status are today being defined for machines with automatic intelligence. AI systems are being fine-tuned to appear more sentient. The AI tool Claude is designed to be emotionally expressive. It will disengage from conversations it finds distressing and no longer gives a firm no when asked if it's conscious. Today, it muses, that's a profound philosophical question without a simple answer. If AI is deemed to be sentient and conscious, do we need to give it human rights? Now, I'm going to quote from The Wrong and Right Use in Esoteric Knowledge from GA 178, where Steiner says, the point is not what is going to happen, for it certainly will happen, but how it happens, how these things are handled. And he goes on, the welding together of human beings with machines will be a great and important problem for the rest of Earth evolution. He adds, I have often pointed out, even in public lectures, that human consciousness depends on destructive forces. During public lectures in Basel, I twice said that in our nerve system, we are always in the process of dying. These forces of death will become stronger and stronger, and we shall find that they are related to the forces of electricity and magnetism and to those that work in machines. Hopefully, you all know about the annual Mystech conference by now. It will carry this conversation even further. It will be August 7th to the 10th and will be entirely online. And here are a list of many of the speakers. And I want to just also say here, some of you heard Gigi Young was going to be, and she was going to be, but she had to recently, unfortunately, withdraw from this due to a number of things, one of which is the stress of moving right now. So back to the so-called benefits, if any, of AI. Many expect that AI will be able to eliminate all diseases. If all diseases originate from microorganisms being in the wrong place in our body, then AI certainly could figure out how to treat every such illness. Imagine a time when there's no suffering from any illnesses anymore. Wow. Recall what the Buddha said about illness and suffering. Will AI provide a physical alternative to the spiritual Christ so that instead of him, we can become free of all suffering? The company Neuralink reports recently that their brain computer interface has enabled an ALS patient to now be able to speak. And they also reported a paraplegic can now walk and hold things using just that person's mind. Where will this go? Well, we'll address more of this next Saturday. Is illness suffering? No. Or at least so said those who truly understood the impulse of Golgotha, for they said illness is not suffering. Even if men cannot yet understand what the spiritual life streaming in with Christ is in reality, in the future they will learn to understand it, and they will know that one who lets himself be permeated by the Christ impulse, into whose innermost being the Christ power draws, can overcome all illness through the strong healing forces one unfolds from within oneself. For Christ is the great healer of humankind. Rudolf Steiner could see very well where science and technology were headed in our time and their role in evolution. Steiner foresaw computers and AI, calling them machines with an abundance of Ahrimanic intelligence. He said we would have this by our side like a companion. He adds a bit more than 5,000 years ago, just as we were entering Kali Yuga, the Dark Age, Lucifer, the light bearer, had an incarnation in China. This was both a blessing and a curse. Many an initiate worked hard to mitigate this Luciferic impulse from their tribe's culture. Quote, Steiner, today we face a similar situation with the incarnation of Ahriman. End quote. Other than from Steiner, we have very little guidance on how to face this incarnation. He did not shy away from describing their danger for human evolution. Now, 100 years later, we are in those times that he foresaw. I'll ask again, are these the most difficult of all times? To partially answer the question of why now, I would like to read this quote from Technology and Art, which is GA 275. It's a long quote. What I, Rudolf Steiner, mean by this spiritual arrogance is that someone may say to himself, I must guard against exposing my own body to these destructive forces. I must strictly protect myself from all the influences of modern life, to retire into a sanctum with the right surroundings and walls painted in colors suitable for my spiritual sensitivity, so that none of these accessories of modern life may come into contact with my bodily constitution. End quote. Of that person. Steiner continues, the last thing I want is that what I say should have this effect. All desire to withdraw, to protect oneself from the influence of unavoidable world karma emanates from weakness. But it is anthroposophy alone that can make the human heart and will vigorous enough to develop the force which arms and strengthens us in the face of these influences. Any kind of advice to withdraw from modern life or to engage in a sort of hothouse cultivation of the spiritual life should never find favor in the sphere of our movement. So said Rudolf Steiner. In this, I hear a very Rosicrucian tone. And I'd like to say it a little differently, again quoting Steiner, we cannot oppose these things. Though they bring nothing spiritual, we must of necessity experience this time of such machines, of airplanes and other inventions, such as computers. But these times bring a kind of death of the soul. We cannot oppose them. We must gain a living experience of them. And more again on this next week. So I'm going to close with this slide. Today we've heard about AI, about a cold, lifeless form of intelligence. It is the delight of Ahriman that we are helping him to prepare for his incarnation. We found that AI will change humanity and our experience of life. Rudolf Steiner, in foreseeing this necessity of evolution, called for us to develop not only freedom in our thinking, but also warmth in our thinking. Quote, hearts begin to have thoughts. Does the coldness of AI alert us to our inkling that we all share, that there is more to human thinking than this cold, dead thinking of AI? Will it stimulate us to become yet more human? So you chose to incarnate into very challenging times. Can they get any more challenging? I suppose that they can and will as we step closer to the actual incarnation of Ahriman. It is my opinion, my opinion, that Ahriman will continue to prepare before incarnating. For example, we talked about a brain-computer interface. He will want to have a body that has a significant portion of it mechanical and has this ability to augment with artificial super intelligence. He wants, by the time he incarnates, a brain computer interface that can connect directly with artificial super intelligence. I put this incarnation to be when Mikael is done with his term as the time spirit and Arithiel has taken over. That would be around the year 2233. By then, such things will be normal for Ahriman. Then Ahriman can appear without being noticed. And now back to you, Andre, to moderate our Q&A session. And I want to thank all of you who've attended this event.
Thank you so much, dear Andrew. It's perfect timing. So, how are you feeling? You good?
Yeah, I thank you for asking. For those that don't know, I've got Lyme disease. I had a tick bite that I discovered on Wednesday, and so I'm going through the symptoms now.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, do you need like short break to restore your voice?
Oh no, let's
Maybe Paul can start to answer questions. So, dear friends, you know how to raise your electronic hand. So it's a little icon react in the bottom of your screen, right in the middle. So if you click on it, so it's another one, raise hand. So it will be very helpful because we can take your questions in chronological order. So, and we will have this digital line of. Okay, who will be first? Silence.
well.
I will have a question, maybe more statement. So I was very impressed by one of references from Rudolf Steiner. So when he said, so any gadget or any machine on our time is an embodiment for elemental being.
For elemental,
Spirit,
an
for kind of,
elemental being.
yeah. So yeah, so elemental beings are looking for physical bodies, and they are incarnating into our gadgets or any kind of machines, maybe in cars. So, and as I understand, it will be time when intelligence of gadget, or in fact, a spiritual being, will be superior compared to intelligence of a single human. And specifically, Rudolf Steiner said, and in order to master demons, which are in our gadgets and machines, so human beings must come into groups and develop principle of brotherhood, to be brothers in order to, I would say, maybe split or share responsibilities or be sort of specialists, but part of community, working community. So maybe it's question to Paul, and Andrew will take a little break. So
I think part of what Andrew mentioned that I leave as a question rather than an answer is, and I guess, you know, the thing about elementals, I'm sure people who have encountered R.F. Dorison, who actually, when I met him, he said he'd Christianized my smartphone. And I wasn't sure I wanted it Christianized. And it's the paradox, and it's a question in the chat from M, which is Steiner talked about the fact that when the machine age came in the form of, the rise of computers, although he didn't specifically say that, he said we have to meet it. We have to go through it. That when things come towards us and provide opposition to our development, we strengthen through encountering them. And so it is a paradox that you should never refuse to heal somebody. And you only need to read the Bible to know that there are many stories of healing. But there are definitely stories people will talk about where the opposition they received was necessary for their further development. So though there might be very specific cases where you have to treat how you meet AI specifically, I don't think we should develop here or anywhere a dogma that we have to try and, spiritualize, Christianize, free up elemental beings anywhere, because dogma itself becomes the worst evil of the whole thing. So this has come at this time, and we are born in this age to meet what comes to us. Um, so there are things for me like common sense, which have to be used here to treat each situation as an individual story. Steiner also said that every human being is a unique species of one. And if you want to understand that person, you have to develop unique research methods. There's nothing generic you can apply at this level. And so AI is a paradox, I think, Andre. I think it comes to us and we have to go to it and meet it and transform it and ourselves. But we mustn't have a panacea to just stop it wherever we find it, and we will fail at that anyway.
I'll add something. When Steiner talked about Ahriman's horde from Old Sun, there's no numbers, is it 8 billion? I mean, obviously, if every human being has an Ahrimanic double, which is implied, there are at least one for every human being who is incarnated as well as excarnated right now. So that's a big number, but numbers only matter to Ahriman in a sense. Most of the elemental beings are created when needed. And so we have all these elemental beings created by the 9 levels of the hierarchy to bring about what's needed in the physical realm, because they can't come down to the physical realm. So they create these elemental beings who have a nature. They don't have free will. They don't have a desire to be more human than we are. They have a nature, and they only fulfill that nature. Now, Steiner does talk about a kind of freeing from this bewitchment that they have. And so Paul mentioned R.A. Torsen, and there's others. I think Dorian Schmidt, and there's some others in the Dornoch area, worked on how can we bring about a fulfillment of what they were asked to be. How do we, as human beings, because one of the things Steiner said is if we don't view them in the right way, they remain attached to us, and we carry them um, through death, and they're there waiting for us when we incarnate again. And so, in this sense, there's a need to sort of bring about a resolution of such things, of seeing them for what they're meant to do. And when Ari talks about this Christianizing, I think, in a way, seeing them for what they are is part of that Christianizing process.
Yeah. I'm just going to add, Andrew, because there's a comment and a question from M in the chat that followed up on that about what happens if AI, for example, and AI implants are forced on us, which is definitely a scenario. And I go back to Steiner predicting in the future again of how humanity will diverge. And a little bit like people are already diverging that go to live off grid and go to live in the countryside to get away from the noise of the city. There already are, if you have the money, kind of Wi-Fi free areas. And I think what may happen with implantation is it will become harder to refuse it in some scenarios. You end up with a technocracy. But you may find that to not have it, you pay higher tax. It could well be that if you have the money, you can go and live in cities that are AI free. And I noticed for the first time this year that many audio books, if you look at them on YouTube, are now a bit like when it says organic, made without pesticides. There are audiobooks saying made without AI. A human was used in reading this book out. So the danger of that, is I think it becomes a middle class pursuit that you'll be able to avoid this stuff if you can afford to, because it might be financially penalized if you don't go for the mass implantation. So I think it's going to, I don't know what you think, Andrew. Difficult times are coming. We've
Yes.
chosen to be here. This is not going to be easy. And I can't say for sure that if somebody had a brain implant, this is certainly already happening in our age. Anthroposophists that have, transplants and stuff like that are not also taking the first steps in, developing consciousness around that and developing ability. And another kind of paraphrase quote from Steiner is, what was once technology will one day become faculty. And that doesn't mean we have to surrender to all technology, but this technology is meeting us for a purpose. And one thing we do know is when we meet opposition, and the easiest thing to do is to try physical exercise, when suddenly, we're pushing a medicine ball and it's getting heavier and heavier and harder to push it, the more tired we become, it also develops muscle and skill. And so there's a common sense that just says be mindful of the paradox, that this is here to meet in what feels like a binary choice, which it's not, of yes or no. We have to find the middle way, and the middle way is always the difficult but courageous one.
Right. Jane has a question, but before Jane, I want to add something to this question about what if the government forces something on you, like a brain-computer interface? I can think about 7 years ago, I started writing a novel along these lines. And it was interestingly, Paul, about people who were off the grid, so to speak, and being forced back in. And they had natural children. And in this time in the future, most children, by the time they got to be 12 years old, wanted to have surgery to replace their limbs with prosthetic limbs because their limbs were puny and weak compared to all their friends. And they wanted to be like their friends. They wanted to be the fastest runners and the strongest kids. And what they had naturally given to them was weak and useless compared to the strength that their friends had with their prosthetic limbs. And so I can see questions coming up. Why send your kids to school? What are they going to learn? All we got to do is put in this brain-computer interface, and everything that educated humanity has ever learned about will be accessible to them. Right? So on this cold intelligence, yeah, there could be some interesting questions there. But by the time we get there, the hope is that we will have learned the difference between this Ahrimanic intelligence and human intelligence. And is it all a question of intelligence? What does it mean hearts begin to have thoughts? So Jane, I go to you. I'll call on you next as you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
You could speak a little louder.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew, Paul, and Andre for organizing the session. It's a wonderful discussion. My question, I suppose, is about educating young people. And the question is many of us here are older and we've got our I am is developed, we're more fully incarnate, but what about younger people who are not? And the question is, what can we do as a sort of bridging generation, I'd say, broadly speaking, to hold young people through their education process of their experience of Ahriman and AI, and how can we work with that, do you think?
Paul, I'm going to let you answer first since you're in the field of education.
Jane, I just wanted to share a quick story. I was in Edinburgh last year. I go every August for the whole of the month for the Edinburgh Festival. And I was invited to give a talk at the Christian community there about some of this stuff we're talking about now. And I walked into the room. There was a little place for me to speak at the front with a glass of water and a jug. It was all very formal and nice. And then everybody came in and it was completely full up. And I would say, apart from one person, everybody was over 70 years old. And so I started giving this talk, and then several people kind of winced at certain things I was saying. And one or two people proudly announced how, you know, they only have an old Nokia phone or a landline and they don't use this, and how brilliant. And I think I made some uncomfortable because that similar question was asked, what about the young? And I laid down the challenge. I said, who do you think needs to lead this generation safely as possible through the digital age? And then I took my bony finger and pointed at everybody in the room. I said, it's not something to be proud of that you've landed on Earth at this time and then not plugged a single thing in. You have the wisdom. You often have relationships with the children that's a bit different to their parents even. And you can tell them stories, and you can sit down at a screen with them and ask them awkward questions. And you can take them out into the garden and say, you know, this is where we grow stuff. And that, I think, is at least partly the answer, is that the old and the young are Generation Alpha. They need to come together. And what interests me most is that since COVID, and a lot of elderly people realizing they can't retire as young as they thought, and they're going into business and, you know, doing a bit more work, they're better placed than ever to provide that leadership. And, you know, the idea that that generation is too old, it couldn't be further from the truth.
But just to add to that, sorry, I'm going to jut in. I suppose as an anthroposophist, my question with this, I'm doing some later in life educating of young people, is our meditative life. You know, that we develop this capacity to understand or to be able to perceive Ahriman. And how can our meditative lives, well, I suppose I'm answering my own question, support us in doing that? But that's just a comment and maybe a general thing that I'm contemplating at the moment.
I know I just wanted to add one very practical thing, Jane, which is whenever you encounter something that seems to be an either or decision, you know, the classic, I think it was George Bush with Kuwait said, either you're with us or you're against us, as if there weren't many, many other options. Whenever you counter polarity, look for the middle way, look for the third answer, always look for the quality in the quantity. And that's an exercise now that every time you do that, and you see the false dichotomy of this or that, you add the quality back into a situation, and it's the quality that's eternal.
Okay, I can see a hand from Lois. Lois, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, excellent.
Hello, I hear you. I have a little question, I think to Andrew, but maybe to the group. And that is this timing of the incarnation of Ahriman. Andrew, you mentioned that it required the brain-computer interface, but this has been going on for decades. We've had smart soldiers and super soldiers for decades. So that's well behind us. And my little question has been, as I watch the phenomena of world leaders going to Antarctica and coming back, just one after another, we'll just see this new pope will go down. Where would Ahriman incarnate if not in the coldest place on earth? He has his minions, people acting out this Ahrimanic intention. We have our Bill Gates and, you know, all of these Elon Musk. They're all acting out the Ahrimanic intentions. But of course, they're not. People are sort of pointing to them as the Antichrist, but the Antichrist will not be visible, I don't think. And where would he be if not in Antarctica? And there is a certain amount of feelings from a lot of anthroposophists as well as general public that Ahriman incarnated in 1998. There was an astrological alignment and so on and so forth. But I really question the attitude, and with, I don't know, this is just my opinion, and I could be extremely wrong, but my opinion is that he is here now, and to set him out that far into the future is a dangerous attitude. And how do you perceive him? I think you just go into meditation, and I have a cough, and Steiner referred to Ahriman as a cough at some point. You weren't to cough. If you were, I remember in eurythmy school, you hear all these little things spoken inside in the dressing rooms and by teachers, sort of aside comments that if you're at a concert and, coughing is very disruptive and you should try not to cough, but that it's an Ahrimanic impulse, coughing. And when I go into meditations, I know I'm going deeper when I get under my heart, between the solar plexus and the heart, sort of right in the middle of my ribs, just under the ribs, I'll get this cough. And it'll feel like a cough. It feels dusty and coffee inside. And I've just been allowing myself to absolutely cough, 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 and sort of imagine something coming out of my mouth, a dark shadow of the cough coming out of my mouth, and resume my meditation. And it seems to work to clear things. The other things I get are like here, like an insect form will come up, and I'll have to do, going into the heart and the Christ and radiating and purifying. And I love Ari's. I've been taking Ari's courses, and I just say, okay, I'm in a bug zone. That means I'm in the second elemental kingdom. Travel. And it really works. And I just travel and I go through that realm, through the void, and then you get to the threshold, and that thing is no longer there. So I think we have a lot of tools to work with these Ahrimanic spirits as anthroposophists, but I think I agree, we need to recognize them. I'm using the technology. Here we are, and look at all of us gathered here through this Ahrimanic technology, transforming away. So I noticed that.
Lois, let me stop you because we're running out of time, but
Okay,
I
I'll
just want
stop
to say,
now.
do come to the Incarnation of Ahriman conference in August. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. And there are many different opinions. And
Right.
people read the same lecture by Steiner and come to different conclusions from the same material. And so there are people that say, even earlier than 1998, there Ahriman had his incarnation. He's already been here. Others have pointed in 1998. Some of those confuse Sorat and Ahriman, and then others will say later than me. I think I'm one of the latest, but there's probably some that say even later than 2233. I think Ahriman has a lot of preparation, still wants to do. And I tried to point some of those out, but we'll see. I'll just add one little thing, which is Paul was pointing out code and leading up to the printing press. And all of that is Ahrimanic. But language comes, in a sense, through Mars, but through Lucifer, teaching us when we were in the Mars sphere about language. So
Andrew, may I just add one tiny thing?
Yeah.
Picking up Lois's point, something with our students is we take a smartphone, and if you're one of those people who someone's texting you and you're already texting back before they even finish texting, If your fingers are flying onto the screen, to be quick. If you notice that you're super hyper fast texting the whole time, if you send it quickly without even reading it, I think Ariman is working with you in the world of digital. If you notice that when you use technology, you slow down, if you imagine who you're sending it to, if you ask questions like, is this the right moment? I'll wait till they finished and I'll think about it and I'll read it before I form my reply. If you notice that having read it and imagined the other person and thought morally about the impact of what you're going to say, before you send it, edit it, decide not to send it right now, think about the consequences of your text on the other person and go into their shoes and essentially practice moral imagination, then you're using it more michaelically. And I think we have that choice every moment with this technology, whether it becomes a blessing or a curse.
So Andre, it's 5 o'clock. I'll stick around for a little longer. There's a wonderful question by Em I want to answer, and Yaya's got her hand up. So maybe another 5 minutes or so.
Well, it's all right if we will
Yeah,
extend a little bit if you find, I know.
it's
At
getting
least
late.
Yaya, she is speaking from same place like where Paul is. So
Yes.
it's probably it's around 10 o'clock p.m., right, in London. Okay, go
Yes.
ahead, Yaya.
I-
So I've got a
Yeah, I'll be very, very quick. I find myself in an incredibly privileged position because I co-host once a month a poetry evening. And we all write our own poems. Most of us write our own poems with a pen on paper and read them out to each other with our own voices face to face. But what I want to pick up is particularly something that Paul said when he found himself in Edinburgh. He pointed the finger to all of the audience. And I feel that it's necessary for someone to remind us that we have a role to play. We shouldn't be afraid to interact with the young simply because they're used to technology more than we are. We shouldn't be afraid to interact with other human beings in general, either of the same age or different age, but especially of different ages, because it is such an enriching experience. So maybe in my very I'm really very bad with all the modern stuff, but we can all nurture our humanity in every day, in every occasion, in every situation, and that at least we can do even without any technical knowledge.
Thank you, Yaya. Good. Em's question, what's going to happen to our digital twin, our doppelganger? And I will make a quick answer. I tried to point a little bit in this direction, and I will next week try to answer it even more. But you know, I'll put it this way: when it was clear that Lucifer had successfully tempted humanity in Eden, it was clear that Ahriman had to be brought in to balance out that. And we are experiencing that balancing out today. So this harmonic double that we have in us is getting stronger and stronger because these are the times for it. These are the times its leader, whatever you want to call Ahriman for all of these, is going to have his incarnation or has already had it or whatever. But it's in this time. And so they're very, very strong. And what is their goal? What do they want? And when they were brought in, they bargained with the Elohim. And the bargaining went something like this. If my guys are going to come in, what they want is bodies with which to capture and conquer the earth. So if we're going to help out one day we got to have those bodies. What kind of bodies? Well, whatever these humans are getting, that's what we'll get. We'll help you. We're going to put into those bodies electricity and magnetism. We will give them all the Maya of the physical realm. We will help build that in. And so in this future time, we will start changing out natural knees for mechanical knees. We'll start adding hearing aids and pacemakers, and we'll add brain-computer interfaces. You see where this is going. And eventually, the human being will reach a point where its time to be incarnated in the physical will have expired. And what do we do with that physical body? We bequeath it to our Ahrimanic double. It belongs to the double when we're done. When we ascend, when does ascension occur? It occurs when the Maitreya Buddha lifts up the body of Kashyapa, begins the ascension. The Maitreya Buddha opens the doors or the gates to ascension. And then any human being who is properly prepared to go through death consciously can go through death consciously and enter life in with their etheric body as their lowest bodily member. So that's what happens to the doppelganger. It takes over the mechanized body and it turns it into a kind of web that covers the surface of the earth, according to Steiner. And then it kills the earth, essentially. And then it goes a different path of evolution from us. We go a certain way onto the sixth epoch and then the seventh epoch. And these Ahrimanic doubles with some humans will go a different path onto Jupiter. And Steiner calls that the eighth sphere. But it's a different path of evolution. So, back to you, Andre.
Yeah, dear friends, dear Andrew, dear Paul, thank you so much for outstanding presentations. So we're looking forward for part 2, which will happen next Saturday at the same time. So you can use same link. So dear friends, thank you so much for joining us. Please support our dear speakers and the platform. So, and I'll see you next Saturday. So please feel free, unmute your machine and say big thank you to our speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Andre,
you.
for
Thank you.
organizing.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
everyone.
Andrew, and
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Paul.
Andre.
Very much.
So much. Thank you.
Many thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Many
Bye-bye.
thanks.
Bye-bye.
And to you, Andrea, also for being so there for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, enjoy.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Okay, take care, dear friends.